This man is drunk. Wait, am I drunk? I'm nobody. Yes, you do have a problem. God's got this. No, I got this. You're stupid. You're dumb. I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm a son. I'm a leader. I am Marcus J. Scott. I'm Marcus J. Scott, author of The Drunken Preacher, here to encourage critical thinking, social awareness, advocate growth, resilience, provide hope, and help you find faith. Welcome to another edition of The Drunken Preacher Podcast. I'm Marcus J. Scott. Man, I tell you, this one is a tough one today. Yeah, this one is a tough one today because today I want to talk about healing while leading. Yeah, today I want to talk about healing while leading. And so, this past week, I've really been mentally and emotionally carrying weight, going through a lot. And a lot of people always talk about, or they celebrate the leaders and talk about how strong they are and, resilient and, all of that stuff, but nobody really talks about the bleeding while serving, the hurting while trying to lead, the pain that leaders and people in their family, whether they're leading their family, their children, a church, a club, or organization, nobody talks about the things that go on behind the scenes. Everybody always sees the light. Everybody always sees the strength. Everybody always sees the consistency. Everybody always sees the running and the running and the going and being there for others. But nobody sees the late nights. Nobody sees the dark nights, the dark moments, the lonely nights, the alone times. And so today we're going to talk about healing while leading. We're going to talk about leading in a direction of strength while struggling privately. And so leadership can become lonely when you're the one constantly pouring into others while silently running on empty yourself. Everybody, again, celebrates leadership, but nobody talks about the hurt, the bleeding while serving. And so people celebrate your strengths, but they rarely notice your exhaustion, your tiredness. And some of the most broken people in the room, some of the most broken people in our community, some of the most broken people in our churches, some of the most broken people in our organizations, some of the most broken people in our country are those holding everybody else together while hurting themselves. And so sometimes leadership feels like carrying people while trying not to collapse yourself. Yeah, sometimes that's just how leadership feels. It's like we're there for everybody else, but sometimes we feel like we're getting ready to collapse ourselves. Have you ever been in a relationship where you feel like you're the only one doing everything? And you might not necessarily be the only one doing it. It just feels that way. It feels like the other person or people or everybody else in your family is relying on you, and you're having to hold it together, carry and be there for the family, and yet you're struggling and hurting on the inside. Yeah, have you ever felt that way where it feels like all the pressure is on you and you're the only one doing, and yet you're hurting on the inside? And so first I want to talk about leading people while personally hurting. Leading through grief, leading through pain, disappointment, financial struggles. Recently I've had a big shift in this last year in my finances, going from making a certain amount of money to a limited amount of money and having to shift how I do everything. And so at one point we're talking about it didn't matter from day to day or week to week what may or may not have been happening. I was financially secure. I was financially stable. I was financially almost, not quite, but almost able to do anything at any moment to being confined to limited resources, to being confined to limited options, to being confined to a limitation. And so going from a, a large pool of resources to a much smaller pool of resources sometimes can be challenging. Now imagine having to make that shift while still trusting God, while still trying to encourage people, while still trying to help others, while still trying to move as though there has been no shift. Have you ever been there where something major happens in your life, and yet whether whether it's to the forefront or not, you feel as though you publicly can't show any difference in before the change and after the change? It's almost like you have to be the same person through any pain, suffering, shift, life changes. People want you to be the same, or people think you're acting funny if you're quiet, or people think that you're tripping because there's been a slight change in how you respond, or maybe you're slower to respond, or maybe you have to think about what you say before you say it because you're hurting, or because you're feeling some pain, or because you're feeling some type of emotion. You don't want to say the wrong thing. And so you speak slowly because you got to think about what you got to say first. And yet people say you tripping. People say you change. People say you're acting different. Well, yeah, because you don't see the hurt or the pain that I'm going through, because you don't see the suffering that I'm dealing with. You don't see the shift that has taken in my life. And yet I still have to proceed as though nothing happened, as though nothing has changed. You know, I often, from a preacher's kid standpoint, I've often seen leaders and pastors, in particularly, that hurt in the background, that hurt behind the scenes, that hurt privately, and they can't often show it publicly. Yeah, I've seen it to where they're hurting privately, but they can't show it publicly. And so leadership doesn't pause because we're hurting. Yeah, leadership doesn't pause because we're hurting, because there are people who are depending on us. There are people who, for me, people, I've come to learn that people are depending on my encouragement every day, because I've been so consistent with encouragement on social media, because I've been so consistent in encouraging others day to day. And so leadership doesn't stop. And so if you are a leader, or you want to be a leader, you do have to understand there are times when you do have to heal while still leading. There are times when you do have to manage and navigate rough and tough times while still walking, while still doing the assignment, while still trusting God, and a lot of times, if not all the time, leaning on his strength. Because yeah, while we have some strength, to be honest, I've come to realize I almost don't have any strength. I always have to lean on God's strength. I always say, God, you got to help me with this one. And sometimes it's the smallest thing, like getting up some days, like being disappointed by a decision that I made that wasn't quite the best decision, that being disappointed by, maybe you applied for a job and didn't get the job. Maybe you were in a relationship and you thought it was going well and it was really going south for the other person, or it wasn't working out well for the other person and they walked out. Maybe it was you were looking forward to um, a financial breakthrough and it didn't come. Maybe you were looking for somebody to be healed and they didn't get healed. Maybe you were looking for something better or something to change and it didn't change for the better. It got worse. And so what do you do when you're trying to heal? What do you do when things are shifting, but you still have to lead? And so I'm here to encourage you that you have to lean on God especially in those tough moments. I believe we should lean on him all the time, but in those tough moments when it's just nothing else. Because here's the thing. We can try to lean on people. We can try to lean on a good friend that we talk to. And yeah, I believe you should have that. But A, nobody has all the answers. And B, you can't gain strength from another individual because we can't rely on people like we can rely on God. We can't rely on people like we can rely on God. Now, I know God puts people in position to help us, but the ultimate strength has to come from him. And so we have to understand when we're leading people, there are times where we're going to be personally hurting that we still have to walk by faith and not by sight. You know, some leaders are functioning publicly, but they're bleeding privately. And just because someone is productive doesn't mean they're healthy. Yeah, let me say that again. Just because someone is productive doesn't mean they're healthy. There have been times, and I mean recently times, where I've been very productive, but I've been struggling mentally and emotionally. And so I often see a counselor, especially in times like this. In fact, I'm probably going to make me a counseling session on Tuesday because there's sometimes a shift that happens where I'm feeling drained or I'm feeling the weight, but yet I still got to lead. And I know I'm being vulnerable right now. I know I'm being somewhat open right now, but hopefully and preferably this will help somebody that says, just because you're hurting doesn't mean you're not supposed to be the leader. Just because you're going through something doesn't mean you were called or you were not called. Just because you're having a tough time or emotional time does not mean the assignment has shifted, changed, or wasn't supposed to be. It just means that you're human and God expects us to rely on him during our human fatigue time. And so while we continue to lead, we have to understand we will have some suffering and hurting moments in private. And so secondly, smiling publicly while struggling privately. Yeah, some of us, we wear masks and sometimes we have to because we can end up leading others down the wrong path or down the wrong decision. Or how can I be preaching to lean on God and yet I'm always down or depressed in my hurt moments? That hurts my witness if I'm saying God is my refuge, my strength in the time of struggles, and yet every time I struggle, I don't seem to have any strength. Every time I have something that happens, I don't seem to have God in my life. Every time something happens, I don't have anything positive to say. Every time something happens that I gotta go back in a cave or disappear or say I can't do it. If I'm saying that God is my strength, if I'm saying I'm the leader of an organization, if I'm saying that I'm leading others, if I'm saying I'm encouraging others. And so there are times when we do have to smile while we're hurting inside. Is that always good? Maybe, maybe not. And that's something to talk about. And so right now you can put in the comment section, how do you handle it? How often do you do it? Is it around certain people? Is it around a small group of friends? You know, my father once told me, get you some a circle of friends or a small group of people that you can confide in, that you can share with, that you can show emotion to, that you can release things to, because everybody can't handle your hurt. Let me say that one more time. Everybody can't handle your hurt, especially if you are a leader, especially if you're leading an organization, especially if you're looked at as the strong person. Everybody can't handle your hurt. And so sometimes being a leader is lonely. Sometimes being at the top is a lonely place. You know, when we look at Jesus, he had disciples, But then he had an inner circle. And then even in that inner circle, he had to leave even the inner circle people at times. And so we got to understand that everybody can't handle our hurt. And so there are times when we have to smile while still taking a step. There are times when we have to move forward, even in frustration. And so what are you going to do today? What are you going to do tomorrow when the pain comes? And yet you still have to walk towards your purpose. What are you going to do when the time comes, when the pain comes, and you still have to walk towards your purpose? You'll hear me say this often. I don't know what else to do but to lean on God. And so I've come to realize that in those tough moments, I have to say, God, you got to help me. God, you have to get me through this. And then I said just a little while ago, oh yeah, I'm a part of several small groups that I know I can pick up the phone or get in the group session or send a text and say, hey man, I need you to pray for me. And so what are you doing when you do have to smile and yet you're sad on the inside? What are you doing when you have to show strength when you're struggling on the inside? And so while unhealed leaders, let's talk about why unhealed leaders eventually break. Because if we're not getting the healing that we need, if we don't have those groups, if we don't have the counselors, if we're not spending time in prayer, if we're not leaning on God, a leader who is not healed can eventually break. Because the unhealed leader suppresses the pain. The unhealed person doesn't talk about it. The unhealed person isolates. You know, I was just studying in the book of Kings where Elijah just, finished a battle and was weak. And as he was weak and went under this tree or bush, the first thing God did was minister to him, sent an angel to eat something and then rest. Sounds like a healing process to me. And sometimes we don't take the time to eat right and rest. Sometimes we don't take the time to make sure we go through the process to heal appropriately. And the biggest thing that happens is that I noticed in that story, Elijah started really emotionally and mentally struggling when he got isolated, when he was by himself. He said, Lord, please let me die. Lord, take my life. Don't allow me to wake up. And there are times, I'm going to be honest, when I have felt that way, when I have said, I just wish I didn't wake up. But those were also the same times that I was isolated. Those are also the same times that I felt like the weight was so bad. I held it in, didn't talk to anybody, that I was struggling. And it wasn't until I prayed and told God, I need you. Then I got some rest. And then I got me something to eat. And then went through a process of healing, went through a process of spending more time with God. I went through a process to say trouble won't last always. And then I eventually talked to my men's group. I eventually went back to the counseling session. I eventually began to talk and let it out and recover from what I had been going through. But most leaders crack and break when they hold it in, when they ignore the emotional burnout, when they ignore the problem that's going on the inside and holding it in. And so what you refuse to heal from will eventually show up how you lead, show up in how you lead. Yeah, what you refuse to heal from will eventually show up in how you lead. You can't keep bleeding on people while calling it leadership. And sometimes leaders make bad decisions because of it. They react wrong because of it, and they mess over people because they themselves are not healed. They themselves have kept it in. They themselves are struggling mentally and emotionally and are not following a process that God has told us we need to do. And sometimes we let our flesh get in the way of how our spirit ought to overcome and what we have to lean on God and walk in. Yeah, we let the flesh take over and how we feel about it. And I found that to be huge because when we lean more on our flesh than our spirit, I learned this a little while ago that fasting is more about your spirit mind overcoming your fleshly desires. Yeah, that's what fasting is all about. Your spiritual being and mindset overcoming your fleshly desires. Your flesh desires to have food. Your flesh desires to watch TV. See, that's the other thing. Fasting is not just about uh, abstaining from food, it's abstaining from fleshly desires. And so, what desires do you have that when God says, I need time with you, that you're going to abstain from and change out the time that you would be eating or watching TV or on social media or on the computer and swap that time with the time you're supposed to be spending with God, with the time you should be praying with God, with the time you should be focusing on where he needs you to be in the healing and rebuilding of your spiritual self. I asked that question. When are you going to take the time in the healing process to suppress what the flesh desires and replace it with spending time with God? Mm. And so God can heal you while still using you. And I've learned that. I won't necessarily say the hard way, but I've learned that God can heal you while still using you. Because I've gone through that this past year, and everything that I've been going through and all the changes that have happened, that God is still using me to help others, to pour into others, to strengthen others, to lead by example, even while I'm hurting, even while I'm going through my own struggles, even while still dealing with things myself. I want to put out this scripture. 1 Samuel 30:6 says, but David encouraged himself in the Lord, his God. David lost everything, faced emotional pressure, and had people turn against him. But he didn't quit or stay broken. He turned back toward God. Mm, that sound that sound like a lot of what I need to continue to do. Because going from just about having everything to losing everything and having to rebuild, wow, walking with God, while walking in my purpose, while walking in a direction he would have me to walk in, I had no choice and have no choice but to turn back to God. Because God didn't abandon David because David was hurting. God can heal you while still using you. He didn't abandon him while he was hurting, but he still used him while he was healing. And we have to understand that God can still use us during our healing process. It's up to us to make the decision to say, God will and can heal me. Now I just have to walk, even though I can't see how sometimes. I just have to take one step at a time. You know how some people say, let's walk day by day. Let's walk, one day at a time. I had to start saying, God, I need you 1 hour at a time, 1 minute at a time. Like every 5 minutes, I need some help. And there were days I had to check in hourly. God, I need you on this one. I know it's 2:00 and I'm struggling. God, it's 3:00. I'm struggling. I need your help. Not just day by day, but hour by hour, minute by minute. And so to every person listening to me, to every leader listening to me, to every father, to every entrepreneur, to every pastor, to every person carrying people while secretly hurting, you deserve healing too. Let's take care of our spirit. Let's take care of our mind. Let's take care of our heart. Because if you keep pouring without healing, eventually you'll run empty. So if you're leading a family, a congregation, or organization, a business, a group of people, a club, any person that's leading one person or more, or a group of people, or an organization, take care of yourself, take care of your heart, because if you keep pouring without healing, eventually you'll run empty. And just because you're leading well doesn't mean you're healing well. Because God cares about both. Let me say that again. Just because you're leading well doesn't mean you're healing well. Because God cares about both. And so starting today, let's move forward and go through the healing process while still pursuing our purpose. All right, let's go through the healing process while still pursuing our purpose. God wants us to finish the race, and he wants us to finish the race strong. But we cannot finish successfully without healing during the process of leading. Let's lead strong today, and let's be healed while leading. All right. That's my time for today. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this message. I know it was a little heavy. I know it was a little bit more serious than usual, but in going through my process while walking in my purpose, I felt that truly just that I needed to do this for somebody that may be hurting while still walking in their purpose, and they may be thinking, I'm unsure, I'm not sure, am I doing the right thing, or am I going the right way? God wanted me to share with you this morning. God wanted me to share with you today. God wanted me to share with you, if you're listening to this, to keep walking by faith. Keep walking in your calling. Keep pursuing your purpose, that he's with you. But make sure we're following the healing process while we're pursuing our purpose. All right, that's my time for today. Hey, don't forget to share, subscribe, and like Marcus J. Scott 4040. Marcus J. Scott 4040. And until next time, always have a heart of gratitude and the strength to keep moving forward. God bless you. Drunken Preacher.